Hi YouTube, it's me doing my vlog ride home. So a few days ago on Twitter, I had talked very briefly about a couple of videos, and I was like, I'm going to do a vlog later, and little did I know, I've tried doing this a few times, and I keep rambling on. And trying to do it again yesterday, I'm like, oh, because I'm trying to unpack something huge. So, I'm going to try and boil it down as best I can on a vlog ride. So, the videos that I talked about briefly on Twitter are two videos back from the mid-2000s called Epic 2014 and Epic 2015. Epic 2014 came out in about 2004. It's a dystopian look at what happens when our internet becomes so entwined with our lives that it is our sole way of consuming media. And just how, as passive observers of media that we often are, how it just becomes even worse. You have the loss of the fourth estate, the major media online. So, you know, things like the New York Times and very important newspapers are not consumed by most people. So it's not a good tone as far as, you know, setting up the dystopia, because it's a dystopia. Epic 2015 came out in 2007 and was an update to 2014. Most of what's there is the same. There's a few little changes early on. The big difference is the end is a little not so down on the world. The end features a former reporter from the New York Times who starts going out with her GPS tracker and is talking about stuff going on in her neighborhood, traffic and events and things like that, and how her neighbors and followers start picking up and doing the same thing. And it kind of sets a slightly more positive tone, but the rest of the video is still very much, you know, dystopian. So we're going to talk about dystopia. It's not uncommon for there to be some kind of ray of light in a dystopia. Not necessarily in the story itself, though you can have that. Usually, you know, it might be, you know, some kind of, you know, epilogue or diegetic notes about the story that indicate that, you know, this is being told from a point of view that is no longer in that dystopia. So, you know, that uplifting would kind of go in the same vein. The bulk of the video is still very much a warning, while, you know, there is that uplift at the end that, you know, this can be better. One of the very interesting things about being in 2019 and watching these videos again, while the videos are very, very dated, it talks about services that don't exist anymore or are hardly ever used. Very popular services some of them are not mentioned at all, because, you know, at least services today, and that's because, you know, some of those services weren't around yet, or were just getting started, or just released out to the public, so they did not have the following yet to catch the attention of the creators who did this video. That said, it is still kind of interesting. While some of the mechanisms that it talks about did not come about, there was not a merger of Google and Amazon, for example. the fourth estate still has a strong online presence. You can go, while a lot of stuff might be locked behind a paywall, a lot of major newspapers you can go to and you can see and read at least, some articles or parts of articles, depending on how old they are and how their paywalls work. Same with magazines. And, we consume, cable news online almost as much as we do on cable television, it would seem these days. So, while that part of it, those things have not come to pass, a lot of the things that it warned these things would lead to have, right? We're still passive consumers of media. We have a bulk of our populace who is still very misinformed. Misinformation spreads incredibly easy on social media. You do have, citizen journalism. You have media produced by normal people, and there is a lot of good, but we have also seen recently how there are problems inherent to that as well. So a lot of what was predicted did come about, and rather than soapbox about how that came to be, because that's boring, instead I wanted to talk about what dystopia is, what it does, and how sometimes I think we miss the point. So, first of all, what is a dystopia? All right. So a dystopia is a type of fiction that acts as a warning, and it acts as a warning. It presents a future based on, actions and developments, be they political developments or technological developments or social developments or whatever, that is bleak at best, and that's putting it nicely. Dystopian fiction came about in response to utopian fiction, which is just the opposite. These social changes, these technologies, these political changes will lead to a life where everybody is happy and it's all roses and singing and whatever. I don't remember if the proliferation or whatever of dystopian fiction came alongside postmodernism. I think it did. I'd have to do some reading, and I don't. One of the things with the vlogging is I have an idea in my head and I want to get some stuff out and talk about some stuff, but I don't always, I'm doing this to do that, but I don't always have the time to sit and do research and stuff that I want to do. But anyway, the question of that is not postmodernism bad, because I kind of like some postmodernism. It's more postmodernism is, in part a response movement. So there you go. We're talking about a type of fiction that is a response fiction. But that's for another thing, or if somebody happens upon this video in comments, to comment. And see, tangents a lot with this. So, all right, that is basically what a dystopia is in a broad sense. One could say that dystopian fiction is basically a book or short story length metaphor. A dystopian society in fiction is a stand-in. When you are writing, if you are writing a dystopian fiction, you're not just writing this cool story that came into your head. You usually kind of have a purpose in writing it. Dystopian fiction tends to serve as a warning about something. So it's very easy to look at dystopia as a metaphor, as a kind of allegory, and I think that metaphorical idea that goes alongside dystopian fiction is also kind of where we get problems in interpreting the ideas of a dystopian fiction. I'm speaking broadly because this is not going to be true of all dystopian fiction. For example, 1984 would not really fit in well with what I'm about to talk about as far as the interpretation of dystopias, because it is not just because the element that is of use in the dystopia, namely political systems, is kind of the point of, it is what is being warned against authoritarianism. So this will not always be true of dystopias, but all right, let's get to our point, and then we can kind of go back and clarify that a little more. So we sometimes, and I'm guilty of this too, we have a tendency not to always see metaphor in fiction. It's easy to take a work of fiction at face value and then just go from there. And there is often more at work in a work than just face value. Likewise, it is very easy. One of the things about metaphor too is that a metaphor does not have to be placed in by the author. A metaphor is something that later, depending on culture and context, can be drawn from the work for something that the author never intended, would not have wanted to create a metaphor for, and may not have even known about. To kind of tease it, when I'm able to actually sit down and be able to do scripting, and I'm actually working on it currently, but I eventually want to be able to do a Kickstarter to try and raise funds to get some real equipment, as far as, cameras and some lighting equipment, maybe, good microphone for, recording audio while I'm taping and things like that. So, and the thing that I want to actually discuss in the Kickstarter launch video is some metaphors behind the werewolf that are not necessarily going to be metaphors that were actually intended by the creators of werewolf fiction, werewolf movies, whatever. So, yeah. Metaphors are something that you can draw from a work with or without the author's intent for that metaphor to be there. But that said, it is not uncommon at all for authors to actually very purposefully put metaphors into their fiction. I seem to reference him almost every video. But Folding Ideas, one of my favorite videos that he has done is on a movie that I also love called Annihilation. It's a 2018 movie. It's really, really good. If you've not seen it, I recommend going and seeing it before you watch this video, or, well, not going and seeing it because you can't see it in a theater anymore, but, you know, checking it out wherever you can find it, you know, getting it Blu-ray or a DVD, or getting it on Netflix or Hulu or wherever you can find it on, because it's really good. I really recommend seeing it. The whole thing is just chocked full of metaphor that, honestly, when I saw it, I wasn't even thinking about. But he talks at length about metaphor and decoding metaphor. And so I do kind of recommend him as a side view for our discussion. So if we're going to look at dystopia as a metaphor, and we're going to look at dystopia as a metaphor for our present society, because that is the idea of a dystopia serving as a stand-in, when it serves as a stand-in or it serves as a warning, it's usually for present society, which typically that's going to be present society of the author, but humans don't seem to learn very well, so that application can actually far outlive the author. George Orwell is a good case study there. 1984 still can serve as a very good warning for us. And, you know, there are parts of our society that we seem to have taken it as a guidebook and not a warning. I can also say the same for The Handmaid's Tale, but I think Atwood is still alive. If we're looking at it as a metaphor, well, so what is this metaphor doing? How is it a metaphor? And that's going to depend on the specific story. Every dystopia is built in a different way. The Handmaid's Tale is not a science fiction. It is speculative fiction. So it does not use science fiction and technology as its warnings. For it, the primary, you know, the things being utilized for creating the dystopia is a disaster, namely, I think the primary one for it is the increase in infertility in humans. I think it was due to pollution and things like that. And then, you know, social and political things centered around women. So, not really any science fiction there, just some speculation about what can go wrong, and then what things, based on how we treat certain segments of our society, can happen in response to it. 1984 was awesome science fiction for Orwell's day. Not really too much on the science fiction side compared to today. Brave New World was, I believe, science fiction. I've not read Brave New World. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. So sorry. I haven't read it. I'll put it on my to-do list. I'm sure that there are probably fantasy dystopias, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. I don't know if Attack on Titan would count, because it's technically on Earth. So, yeah. So I'm trying to think of any fantasy utopias, but it would serve the same thing. You would just be using different mechanisms in a fantasy for a dystopia versus, science fiction or, speculative fiction or whatever. So exactly what it's doing and what it's hearkening to and what it's warning about is going to be different based on the story. We tend, when we are looking at dystopian fiction, to, whether it's books or whether it's movies, comic books, whatever, when we look at that dystopia, we tend to focus in on the thing as the thing being warned against. And like I said before I went into this, with some things like, say, 1984, that is very valid to do, because that is very much the point of Orwell's writing of 1984, was to warn against authoritarianism and how it doesn't just come from fascism. But that tendency kind of means that you're just taking the story at face value as well. And if that's the intention, that's fine, but that's almost never all that there is to it. And in some cases, it may not even be the point of the story at all. With science fiction especially, we tend to do this with technology. If there is a story about an AI going mad or robots destroying the world, the warning taken from it is, technology bad. Technology not bad. Much like, feminist criticism of, movies and video games. It's not about thing bad. Technological dystopias are not, or at least not just about thing bad. The thing that is almost always going to be a common denominator in every dystopia, whether it is 1984, whether it is Brave New World, whether it is Handmaid's Tale, whether it is the Terminator movies, whether it is Attack on Titan, whatever your dystopian fiction is, almost always your common denominator is going to be humanity and what we did wrong with thing. If you take a dystopian story about genetic alteration is not in and of itself bad. It's just a technology, it is just a science, and it is just a tool. We can argue the ethics of, altering the genetic code of an embryo in order to produce, whatever type of child that a parent wants to give birth to. Okay. We can argue those ethics, but why? I mean, yeah, I know why. But, you're looking at not devaluing humans who do not match whatever perfections. But let's not forget that, these sciences also can be used to prevent very deadly and, ideally would be able to be used to prevent very deadly and very difficult to treat diseases. If you have never had somebody who has a genetic disease like lupus or MS, for example, I do have family members who have both of those diseases. They are not easy to treat. Treatment of these diseases is sometimes as harsh on the body as the diseases themselves. So, if you devise a treatment that can if you can find the genetic code that says, okay, that's where the disease is going to form, and you can remove that genetic code out of an embryo's, DNA, you're doing something incredibly beneficial. And doing that incredibly beneficial thing does not mean that you are devaluing people who have lupus. It just means that you are preventing further cases of lupus from happening. It'd be like saying that if you are vaccinating against the flu, in order to prevent people from getting sick this season with the flu, that you're saying that people who have the flu are worthless as human beings. So, yeah. Just because a story presents a bad outcome from a thing does not mean that thing is necessarily bad. Again, the common denominator in almost every dystopian fiction that you are going to find are humans, and it's what humans are doing with these things. How humans are behaving with these things, and because of these things. And how we react to things, how we use things, how we respond to them. Those are all things well within our power as humans to control. We do not have to be bad people and do bad things. I kind of want to talk about Terminator in this as far as metaphor, and I kind of want to save it for another time. And I think I'm going to, because I want to make sure, one of the problems I've had all week is, limited memory on my phone, and I'm trying to clear that up, but I'm also trying to, make sure that I get a vlog up, because I want to keep doing it and be as steady as I can with it. So I think what I will do is tease it and then talk about it in another vlog. I want to talk about the idea of specifically with the first Terminator movie, maybe a little bit of the second Terminator movie. I don't really care about the rest of the franchise after that. The third Terminator movie was okay, and then I got bored. But the first two Terminator movies, I absolutely love. And, the perils of time travel stories aside, the movies very much warn against a very obvious dystopian society. Robots wipe out the humans. And we can look at a metaphor there, and I want to examine that because, most especially with the Terminator movies, it's, robots taking over the world, robots bad, AI taking over the world and destroying humanity with nuclear war, AI bad. I hear that so often with, as takeaways from those movies. And I want to talk about an interpretation where that misses the point. So that's my tease. So I guess to be continued. If you like this, you don't mind me on my car ride with the weird lighting because of the sun in my visor and it's late afternoon, then, like, share, subscribe. Check me out next time. Hit me up on Twitter. I'll have, when I have a chance to get some links in the description, I'll have links in the description hopefully later this evening, depending on when this actually fully uploads. And peace.